I'm going to start part 2 by reading the 6 conclusions at the end of part 1. Remember, it has taken a lifetime of study and enlightenment to reach these conclusions. Here then are the 6 parts of that jigsaw. Heaven is not what we think it is. The most likely scenario is that it is a different solar system on another Earth, in another galaxy, in another dimension of space and time. It is probably inhabited by a form of life which is not human and is not carbon-based. Having read the Bible for over 55 years, I have to conclude that it is quite rare for any adult humans to reach heaven as a form of afterlife. But I also conclude that the future for children is quite different to adults. At least 22,000 children per day go to heaven as a result of global malnutrition, starvation or disease. This number is based on figures provided in 2012 by the Save the Children Fund. It has also been happening since the beginning of time, if the Bible is to be believed. Listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 18 and 19. See that you do not offend one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost. And Matthew 19, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Hell is not what we think it is. Eternal punishment does not exist. Humans do not have immortal souls. My own definition of hell is separation from life and separation from God. The word is used in the Bible to describe the dead, or the death state, not an actual place in a material sense. The Bible mentions death and the possibility of an afterlife in virtually every chapter in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, but is still undecided about the death state. There are many verses which talk about an afterlife as some form of consciousness, and there are many verses which talk about an afterlife of unconsciousness or extinction. The Bible uses several words for the death state, the most common being the Hebrew Sheol and the Greek Hades. Both these words mean the same thing, an unseen or unknown state. My own definition of the afterlife is a state of unconsciousness between this life and the next. There is no punishment and there is no reward. There will be a material and bodily resurrection of the dead in the distant future, but this is not an afterlife. This will be the beginning of the next life for many, and will be a second and final death for everybody else. There is a lake of fire at the time of the end of the world, but it is not hell. It is eternal death, extinction, nothingness, extermination. The lake of fire is a second death, as described in Revelation 20. When all the verses are examined, which contain a specific reference to the afterlife, the lab samples mentioned in Part 1, only one verse out of 200 could not be explained by any other means other than eternity or punishment. 199 verses out of 200 do not involve the combination of the three vital ingredients: humans, eternity, and punishment. Would you still be willing to believe in a cruel God on the basis of less than 0.5% of scriptural evidence? In Part 1, I promised to examine these 6 points in greater detail and produce the Bible verses which prove them. If you haven't listened to Part 1, by the way, then please do before you watch this. It won't make much sense without it. But first, a warning about Bible verses. The Bible is a very large collection of books from many different writers, and verses can be taken out of their context and misunderstood or misinterpreted to mean anything you want them to mean. As a result of this misuse, you could say the following: all spiritualists, fortune tellers and witches have to die. Leviticus 20. If you tell a lie, you have to die. Deuteronomy 19. If you work on a Sunday or Jewish Sabbath day, you have to die. Exodus 35. If you show disrespect to your parents, who, remember, may well be bad parents, you have to die. If you put any hobby, job, spare time pursuit or ambition in the way of God, you have produced a form of idol. As a result, your children will be punished. Also, your grandchildren will be punished, and your great-great-grandchildren also punished, up to 4 generations. This is from the famous 10 Commandments. If you look at any woman in a lustful way, you are an adulterer. Matthew 5. You are entitled to destroy all medical centres which practice abortion. Matthew 18. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Yes, the Bible actually says these things, and the list just goes on for as long as you want to imagine. This means that if we take the Bible literally, complete anarchy, chaos and violence would rule society. But hold on a minute, what am I saying? Am I saying don't take the Bible seriously? Yes, I am actually, but only if you know very little about life in general and very little about the Bible to start with. Am I saying don't take the Bible literally? That is a definite yes, in virtually all circumstances. In order to fully understand all this, you will have to take my word for it, for now. In the wrong hands, the Bible is a very dangerous book. In the right hands, it can be just the opposite and may even save your life. I encourage you to read my book for a complete examination of the Bible and the meaning of life. So what exactly are the right hands and who decides? Well, only you can do the deciding, and you must make up your own mind, regardless of what any other expert says or doesn't say. That includes me as well, by the way. Relying on the archbishop of this or the pastor of that, the evangelist of this or the preacher of that, the vicar of this or the vicar of that, is not going to get you anywhere. Believe me on that. I've spent the best part of 40 years arguing this and that with the pastors of this and that, and it gets you nowhere. But what about the wrong hands? How do you know that when I quote chapter and verse from a book of social studies, ancient laws, ethics, parables, allegory and Jewish history, that's the Bible by the way, that I am reliable in what I say? In a word, how do you know whether the Bible is reliable? Well, actually you don't. Unless you have years of experience behind you and can spot a parable or a metaphor in less than 10 seconds. You really need a huge dose of skepticism when approaching anything religious and start asking awkward questions when things don't sound right. For 40 years, heaven and hell have never sounded right to me. I will keep repeating what I said in part 1 of this series. Who wants to believe in a God who rewards every normal, intelligent, non-believer and atheist with an eternity of fiery punishment? Don't forget who the normal, intelligent non-believers are. The doctor who found a cure for polio. The aid worker who was murdered helping war victims and refugees. The soldier who died for his country. The pensioner who died from AIDS because he was helping drug addicts find a normal life. The firefighter who died when the World Trade Building collapsed on September 11th. The multimillionaire who gave millions to charity. The politician who spent his entire life changing the discrimination laws. I'm not mentioning any names, but all these people did not believe in the existence of any God of any description. All my listeners should already have the common sense to know that you don't have to believe in any kind of God in order to do good to a fellow human being. You do good for the sake of the good itself and because you want to as a human being. The golden rule works for everybody regardless of creed, background, nationality or religion. I repeat, the golden rule works for everybody and not just the religious minded. If you don't know what the golden rule is, then you really should spend a bit more of your life reading the right books, meeting the right people and broadening your horizons generally. In the internet age of knowledge everywhere and communications in a nanosecond, there is really no excuse for not being well informed and educated. The other point about the traditional Christian heaven and hell, which has never sounded right, is its black and white nature. You're either in or you're out. You're a sheep or a goat. You're a believer or you're an infidel. You're good or you're bad. Humans are infinitely more complex than being reduced to good or bad, believer or non-believer, atheist or theist. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. In one sentence, the traditional Christian view of heaven and hell doesn't work. It doesn't even work when you examine all the Bible verses or put them all in neat rows as the imaginary doctor did in part 1 of these talks. This problem has so worried the Roman Catholic Church that they invented a third place, which actually doesn't exist in the Bible, called purgatory. In theology, the stage of the afterlife where souls suffer for their sins before they can enter heaven. I have to admit it's a brilliant idea. So why do I have to be a pessimist and say it doesn't exist? Well, to be honest, I don't know for absolute certainty that it doesn't exist. It all depends on how you interpret a few verses in the New Testament and one in the Old Testament. Here they are, and you can make up your own mind. Corinthians chapter 3. If any man builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay or straw, his work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each man's work. If what he has built survives, he will receive his reward. If it is burned up, he will suffer loss. He himself will be saved, but only as one escaping through the flames. And here is a verse from the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 12. He replied, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand." The problem with these verses is that they are obscure in the sense that they don't fit an overall pattern found elsewhere. It is more likely that these verses refer to the person's present life rather than a future or some form of afterlife. What does fit an overall pattern is what is known as a second death. This is an established theme of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. Here are a couple of verses from that book. Revelation 20. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what he had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. It seems to me that humans have an innate need to know everything they possibly can about everything, with the result that where there are gaps and inconsistencies, we invent something. The subject of death probably has the greatest number of gaps and inconsistencies in any subject in the study of theology, and therefore we need to be careful not to be over-imaginative or over-inventive. For me, the idea of hell being a purgatory is a little inventive, to say the least. It is not even a material place. The idea of hell being a place for both righteous and unrighteous souls waiting in unconsciousness until the end of days is fairly near the truth of the matter, and as far as I know is a standard belief of Judaism. But it just shows how difficult it is to separate the idea of a place from the idea of just a description of a state of being, or a state of non-being. If you listened to part 1, you will remember I said that if you extract all the verses in the Bible which refer specifically to the afterlife and place them all side by side, as a scientist would, samples in a laboratory, you will find that the Bible writers did not really know the answer to life after death. You will find as many verses which talk about non-existence as there are verses which talk about going to some sort of afterlife. Here are 2 from the New Testament as an example. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Matthew 10. Then the thief said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. Luke 23. Remember who was supposed to have said these words. The same person who we are relying on to give us some element of truth on the subject that we are talking about. And here are 2 from the Old Testament. Ecclesiastes 3. Man's fate is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. At that time, Michael, the great prince, who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. That's from Daniel chapter 12. But you can see how they appear to contradict each other. So the answer is the same. However much we examine this subject, we are never actually going to come to an actual conclusion. We may get fairly close to what we think is a reasonable solution, but that is as near as we can get. Of course, truth is important, but there may be a reason for this permanent state of ignorance which we may have overlooked. It may just be that if there is a God, he actually doesn't want us to know. This is a strange state of affairs, to say the least, as the Bible is fairly straightforward in most of its teachings about, well, teachings and doctrines. Sin, repentance, prayer, lifestyle, prophecy, suffering, the meaning of life, the future of the world, and so on. So we need to ask, if there is a God, and he, she, or it doesn't want us to know about the afterlife, or even whether there is one, why? Why doesn't God want us to know? The reason, I believe, is that God requires something from us. It's called feedback. In religious terms, this is sometimes called faith. By not giving us all the answers about something which we would love to know all the answers, he is asking us for something in return, in the form of faith or trust. Let me put this another way, and then you will probably see what I mean. Imagine that you are one of the passengers on the Titanic, and you are lucky to be allowed onto one of the overcrowded lifeboats as the boat sinks beneath the icy waters. Would you jump into the lifeboat, or would you step aside and let the next person, who would most likely be a complete stranger, take your place? If you step aside and so trust your eternal afterlife to God, because you know for certain that you will drown, then you have faith in God, whatever that future happens to be. This is why the jigsaw of life and death, heaven and hell, the purpose of life and so on, are never complete, because you are the one who has the missing piece. This is the way that God has set things up. You are part of your own destiny, and you have the power to change it now, in this life, not in the next life, when it will be too late. I don't want to sound over-enthusiastic or evangelical, but if you believe there is a God, then you are already halfway to real grace and mercy, which is a type of metaphorical heaven now. If you don't believe in any sort of God, then you are stuck in a type of metaphorical hell now. Jesus made this quite plain when he was dying on the cross. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" I don't think that Jesus was afraid of dying. He was afraid of being separated from God. It's the separation which is the hell. For 3 days and nights, as his dead body lay in the tomb, and his unconscious spirit knew nothing, Jesus was separated from the one who had given him life and power, just as surely as the sun gives life and power to the solar system and the earth. So here is a definition of heaven and hell. If God exists, then heaven is being alive with God, or in the presence of God, or being part of the power of God, both now and in the future. Hell is the opposite. It is being alive or dead, without God, without his presence, and without his power. If you think this is too figurative or metaphorical, and therefore not based in reality, try explaining that to these people. The young man whose life is ruined by drug addiction. The many women who suffer violence and abuse at home. The hell of prison. Being confined to a wheelchair all your life. The many who are mentally ill. The father who loses his child because of a war which he doesn't want. The thousands of refugees who have no home. Yes, hell does exist right now for millions of people. And what would be living in heaven right now, and in a figurative sense? Well, actually, that is what most people fail to see. Hell and suffering are easy to see. Grace and mercy, which is living in a type of heaven, cannot be seen because we all take it for granted. Are you one of these people? An ordinary, average, hard-working individual with an ordinary, average job? An ordinary, average family and an ordinary, average partner? Living with ordinary, average health, and own an ordinary, average house, and have ordinary, average holidays and average wealth? You take it all for granted. But should you? Haven't you become just the same as the fish in the pond that cannot see further than the water it swims in? This is why everybody blames God for hell and suffering, but nobody thinks about thanking him for grace and mercy. Ask yourself, why does everybody go about their everyday, ordinary, average lives, living in health and happiness, and fail to see God? And then when things go wrong, God suddenly springs into existence and gets all the blame. It doesn't make sense. No. Is it logical? Being in God's presence is not some highly charged numismatic experience which only lasts milliseconds and then is gone, but is as easy as any plant or flower will turn in the direction of the light in order to live and grow. If you think this is just wishful thinking, then consider this. In the next life, after the second death you have just read about in Revelation 20, there will be no sun, as the power, energy and presence of God will give all the light and energy that everyone will need to live. Revelation 21. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendour into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. This is from Revelation 21. Here is the rest of that quotation. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. It's almost as if the Bible is saying that our present sun, which gives earth all its life and energy, is somehow false, and the energy from God is the real thing. So don't forget my definition of heaven and hell. This will make a few appearances as we continue through this series of video talks. As I go through virtually every chapter and verse which Jesus spoke about the afterlife, you will see that this definition fits every single verse, both metaphorically and literally, and both in this life and in the next.